Welcome to your astrological forecast for the week of Monday, October 14th through Sunday, October 20th, 2024. This week, I was just kind of focusing on the themes, going over the different placements and transits that are happening right now. And I really think the main theme right now is that things are a little bit kind of awkward and uncertain as we are adjusting to a very new phase. And the reason why is because I think many of us have gone through awakenings largely in September. We had this weird retrograde that Mercury did that took up most of August. September, we came out of that and we really kind of woke up. Many of us had different kinds of enlightenments and epiphanies and things of that nature. So now going into, deeper into October, we're kind of finding our way through these new realities that we've set for ourselves, coming off of those realizations of last month. And it is awkward. We're feeling a little bit out of place. Things are kind of new and different and strange. And this is for many reasons astrologically. One is that, there are many retrograde planets right now. I won't go through all of them right at this moment. But another thing making the astrology kind of awkward and strange and unusual is we have so many debilitated planets. I've talked about that in recent forecasts. How if you look through, we've got Uranus, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, and Venus all debilitated. So that is a majority of the planets, I believe. It's over half of them. So that just indicates that we're feeling a little estranged right now. We may be very much out of the box. I like using that kind of metaphor for debilitated placements because not only are we thinking more creatively and being more open to different perspectives, different ideas, but we're also out of the box in the sense that we may feel kind of alienated or out of the picture, out of the loop, so to speak. We're really forging our own paths right now, which is very exciting but also a little scary. Another thing as well indicating this kind of awkwardness is we've had a lot of YODs. We have a lot more YODs coming as well. I believe the first one I talked about for last week's forecast, the weekend that we're just coming out of as we start this week, had a YOD that Mercury made with Neptune and Uranus. And this week we have something similar because the sun, if you look here, even as we start the week, you can see that Mercury is ahead of the sun right now. Sun is kind of following Mercury. And so Mercury just made that YOD last week. Now it's the sun's turn basically to enter that YOD as well. So by the time we're recovering from one YOD, and if you don't know what that is, if you didn't listen to the last week's forecast, the YOD is just it's a really strange situation. I will cover it more in depth as we get to that aspect for this week. But it's just generally a very strange and kind of bittersweet situation that doesn't really have a solution. It's a complex aspect that involves two quincunxes and one sextile. So the sextile adds this harmonious element to it, but the two quincunxes add a lot of, I was going to say trepidation. I honestly don't even know what that means. But the quincunxes add a lot of awkwardness, and that's the more problematic energy because quincunx energies, it's combining 2 points that are so different from each other. It's like combining oil and water. They really don't combine, and so there's no solution there, no pun intended. But anyway, so we have another YOD for this week. Even in the next week's forecast after this week, there will be more YODs later as well. So very relevant. And before we begin the week forecast, I just want to say YODs are actually my favorite aspect. They are so weird and awkward, and there's so much to digest there. So it's not all bad by any means. At any rate, though, let's get into this forecast. So other than these like awkward and exciting but also awkward dynamics that I just kind of briefly went over, we do have a full moon this week, as you know from the title. And that is definitely the biggest thing going on this week that I can see. There are some other things that I do think are important to talk about. But first, let's look at that chart for the full moon. So we can see Thursday, October 17th. This is noon Eastern Daylight Time, Eastern time. We have this full moon will occur at 24 degrees Aries. So it looks like it happens early in the day, Eastern time, with the sun at 24 degrees Libra, moon at 24 degrees Aries. This is a big deal because it's the first full moon that we've had since eclipse season. And this one is interesting because it's very close to being an eclipse. I've talked before about how A full moon lunar eclipse would be a full moon, so in other words, the sun and the moon being opposite one another, and having both the sun and the moon being close to the lunar nodes, right? And you can see here, south node is in Libra, sun is in Libra, north node is in Aries, moon is in Aries. They are less than one sign apart. So, in other words, the sun and the moon are very close to aligning with the Earth. They're close to aligning to create a full moon lunar eclipse, but not quite. This is not an eclipse, but it's close to one. So basically what that means is this is going to be more intense than a normal full moon. Not quite as intense as a full moon lunar eclipse, but more intense than a typical full moon. This is especially true because the full moon is in Aries, which is it's an intense sign. It's a more volatile sign, right? Very fiery and energized. So yeah, this full moon may be exactly what you need to, get up on your feet, get to doing something, start something new, put yourself out there. We're exploring interpersonal dynamics through Libra season, of course, with Sun in Libra. But the full moon in Aries is really bringing a lot of individuality to the picture as well. It's about that balancing, Sun and the moon, which are opposite. They're facing off. Sun is in Libra, which is much more receptive. Moon is in Aries, which is much more individualistic and more kind of masculine. If you think about it, they're kind of out of place. I think Sun, would be more comfortable in Aries where it's exalted. Moon would be more comfortable in Libra, but they're kind of almost in each other's places, I would say. Even though the moon doesn't technically rule Libra, I think Libra kind of fits the moon's themes more. So even the sun and moon are kind of out of place if you think about it. That's what I'm saying. This is a strange energy, but yeah, this will bring some much needed fire to the picture. Really great for all you fire signs out there, but for the rest of us as well. This is, like I said, it's great for starting something new. What's interesting about this full moon is that it does make a couple aspects. For one, it is conjunct Chiron, only an orb of just a few degrees off. And I've mentioned how, Chiron has been in Aries since 2018, and since that time, this has sort of been outrage culture, if that makes sense. Chiron and Aries has really brought everyone's sensitivities to the forefront. We're very outspoken about our truth and our plight and our suffering, which is great. Don't get me wrong. It's really great that we can be so honest and transparent with our struggle and just our experience in general. And it's really opened up a lot of conversations, which I think is important. On the other hand, though, this is also a very destructive energy where many of us are kind of shouting and we're not listening as well, because Chiron is a little bit out of place in Aries as well, if I'm being honest, as I explored in a recent post. But at any rate, full moon is conjunct Chiron, so it's really channeling up that energy. So I wouldn't be surprised to see maybe protests right now, especially when you combine all of it together, this awkward energy, feeling different, being more individualistic, and then now you add this full moon in Aries conjunct Chiron. It's a lot of really individualistic energy, which is kind of unusual for this time of year. This is supposed to be Libra season. It's supposed to be, let's enjoy the fall leaves and, let's explore being diplomatic and social graces and things like that, but really nothing else in the chart is supporting that. Mercury and Venus are already in Scorpio, which is very different. All the debilitated placements, moon and Aries, nothing is going along with Libra sun. If anything, there's much more Mars energy. There's so much focus on Scorpio and Aries, which are both ruled by Mars, but even Mars is kind of estranged because it's debilitated in Cancer. So this is this chart is all over the place. So we may feel all over the place, especially as we approach Thursday. It is a great time for taking action. It may be a good time for getting something off your chest, saying something that you maybe kind of didn't have the courage to say before. But on the other hand, that can be further dysfunctional as well. Maybe there's a reason to have certain hesitations about saying certain things. We might come across a little bit crass or, very bold, or very, very direct, which, of course has its pros and cons. Another thing interesting about this full moon is that it's making a T-square with Mars, which is a very volatile aspect. Hurricane Milton actually made landfall right as there was a quarter moon, with Sun and Moon were also squaring Mars, just in a different way because Moon was in Capricorn about a week ago. So that's what I'm saying. T squares are basically two squares and an opposition. Those are all intense aspects. They're tense aspects. They tend to be more dysfunctional and challenging. So it's a similar situation here, maybe even more intense because of the full moon aspects, plus channeling in Chiron's energy and everything else. So it wouldn't surprise me if many people were fighting with their families around this time. Of course, that will look a little bit different for each person and their unique astrology. Not everyone will relate to that. But Mars is in Cancer, showing that we're maybe a little bit more defensive over our families. So, very loyal to our family and defensive of them. But at the same time, we may be fighting with our families as well. So that energy is being channeled in as well. Really, the Sun, Moon, and Mars are all kind of facing off. But again, what's interesting is none of them are particularly strong. Sun is in fall in Libra, Mars is in fall in Cancer, and then Moon in Aries is just kind of out of place. So it's just really a bizarre energy, if I'm being honest. Plus, full moons, as you know, are kind of bizarre anyway. So it's just when you add it up layer after layer after layer, this is going to be a strange day. It's going to be weird. And again, it wouldn't surprise me if there were protests, heated arguments, debates, truth from the past that was buried, like being brought up to the surface. It makes me think of, this is kind of gross, but it makes me think of a scab where the scab is being ripped off and we're bleeding again. That's that's honestly kind of what I picture with this type of energy. So yes, this does look combative. It looks chaotic, maybe stressful or scary. But on the other hand, this can be good. Disruption can be good. This is bringing some kind of change, and like I said, it may give us courage to do things that we've been afraid to do before. So also on this day, Venus sextiles Pluto, Venus will sextile Pluto immediately before entering Sagittarius. So I think this is generally positive for everyone. I Love Maths comes to mind if you're watching this. I know you probably aren't going to be a fan of Venus leaving your sign of Scorpio. But for most of us, Venus is in detriment in Scorpio. So basically, going forward from Thursday, as we start to recover from that full moon in the days after, at least we can enjoy Venus being out of detriment, because Venus in Scorpio is generally difficult for everyone, for most people, I should say. Obviously, anyone with major Scorpio placements will enjoy having Venus in their sign, generally speaking, since Venus brings abundance and pleasure wherever she goes. But as a whole, though, I've mentioned how, Venus and Jupiter both being in detriment recently has really kind of negative implications for the economy, for economics and things like that. These are both the planets of abundance. Having them both debilitated and Jupiter retrograde as well, it really indicates we've withdrawn from the pleasure recently. But that all changes going forward because Venus enters Sagittarius, which is much more free-flowing, and, putting Venus, the planet of love and desire and attraction, putting her in Sagittarius, which is probably the most optimistic sign. Sagittarius is all about expansion and trying new things and adventure. I think this is a very fun transit, generally speaking. I think it just shows that we're opening up with what we desire, rather than being kind of closed off and very selective and kind of intense about our desires, as we have been with Venus transiting through Scorpio. It shows that generally we're opening up, desiring kind of new things, being a little bit more playful or experimental, maybe enjoying long distance travel is always associated with Sagittarius, so it could be that, or just trying new things in general as well. Okay, let's go forward to this weekend, though. So this is where we get this really weird YOD, and you can actually see this in the aspects. I don't usually look to these lines in the middle, really. I'm more focused on the degrees of all the planets. But you can see how the aspects change here, though. There's a few major sextiles and then some minor, harsh aspects. But going to this this chart, it almost completely kind of changes. At any rate, though, what I wanted to show you is for the weekend of October 19th through the 20th, Saturday and Sunday, we have another YOD forming. The sun is now at the position that Mercury was almost exactly a week ago. So it's basically the same YOD between Neptune and Uranus. It's just the sun this time around 27-ish degrees Libra rather than Mercury. So honestly, this may be an echo. Whatever happened that was kind of awkward or slightly problematic from last weekend, that may be spilling over into this weekend, if that makes sense. So think about whatever was going on for you last weekend. It's going to be similar this weekend. Generally, it's a situation that there's not really any solution to. Honestly, I think the solution would be kind of just waiting it out. And I know that's kind of a scapegoat answer, or what's the word? That's kind of a cop out. That's what I was trying to think of. Kind of a cop-out answer, but honestly that's my answer for certain things in astrology. Sometimes it's just like weather. We can make the most of it, but ultimately there's not much you can do. It will pass. I do think that especially applies to quincunxes and by extension the YOD aspect, because how do you combine Sun is in Libra and then we're combining that with Neptune in Pisces and Uranus in Taurus? These energies are all completely different. The only commonality with this particular YOD is that there is a Venus connection with all three of these signs, Venus ruling Libra and Taurus and being exalted in Pisces. So I mean, there is that is a difference with this particular YOD than what we had last week. So in a way this may actually be less dysfunctional than last week, because last week Venus was in detriment. So Venus, the ancient way of looking at this would be to say Venus wasn't a good host. She wasn't prepared to be a good host last week because she was in detriment and she didn't really form major aspects with most of these planets. Only Neptune really. Well, and in opposition to Uranus. This week it's different because by this weekend Venus has just entered Sagittarius. So she's at least in a slightly more auspicious sign, but Venus is still not really aspecting any of these planets. So basically it's just an awkward situation. On one level we want to be harmonious and sociable and diplomatic and all that good stuff, all that Libra stuff, but on the other hand, how do you also equate that with being very mystical and tuning into the whole world like Neptune and Pisces wants to do? And also much of that is about going within as well. Neptune is retrograde in Pisces, and then we're also combining that with Uranus, the planet of earthquakes, which is retrograde as well in Taurus and debilitated in Taurus. So it's almost too complex to even, I like to get into the nitty gritty and the details of it, but honestly, I don't think, like, I could talk about this for hours, I guess is what I'm trying to say, and I'm not going to do that to you. But basically, yeah, it's just going to be an awkward situation. For more information, you can look to where does 26 degrees Libra fall in your chart? Do you have any placements near there? Because that is the focal point of this YOD. So it's almost like an arrow, they call it the finger of God. God is like giving you the finger, with Neptune and Uranus being the backside of the arrow. They're pointing toward the sun with this aspect. So that's why 26 degrees Libra, that represents an area of your life where there needs to be change in that area, but it may not be immediately clear what kind of change is meant to be made. There may be some kind of crossroads, some kind of crossroads or choice where neither option is preferable, but there's something bittersweet about it. Uranus and Neptune are sextiling. There is a harmony there, but it's fleeting. It's difficult to connect to. So it kind of just is what it is. But yeah, that's pretty much what I have for you. Next week there is another YOD. I know, everybody's favorite, but it's a different YOD though, because we've had Chiron and Jupiter sextiling. So now as we get planets going through Scorpio, those will trigger a YOD. We also have Sun changing signs, entering Scorpio, and there's a third quarter moon as well. So definitely tune in next time. Otherwise, thanks for hanging out with me. Hope this helps you, and have a great week.